Local 514's host Savannah Craig interviewed Dr. Norma Rentisi, a professor at Concordia University, as well as Matthew Polinchuk, a Montreal resident. Craig interviewed Polinchuk and Dr. Rentisi to gain insight on the Canada Revenue Agency not looking into a potential $15 billion in ineligible Canada Emergency Wage Subsidies payment not having been paid back, while many Canadian residents ineligible for the Canada Emergency Response Benefit were forced to reimburse the payment they received from the government.
Sure.
So Norma, if you don't mind, please stating your name and your role.
Sure. Sorry, just a second. Sorry, my name is Norma Rantisi, and I'm currently a professor at Concordia University in the Department of Geography, Planning, and Environment.
Thank you so
And my
much.
interests are centered on local economic development, economic restructuring, political economy.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Norma. Um, was it essential for the government to provide CEWS payments for businesses during the pandemic?
Well, there was definitely a need for some kind of support during the pandemic, but whether or not it was direct form of subsidy to businesses is a big question mark because, as you're well aware, in a lot of cases, there's difficulty for oversight and transparency in terms of how the money is being used. And in many cases, it would be much more beneficial to provide direct supports to employees because CEWS as a program was initiated with the onset of the pandemic in order to prevent things like layoffs and terminations. So the ultimate concern was helping workers to stay afloat and was an impetus behind this. So that raises questions of why not give directly to workers that are in need or at risk.
In terms of giving money directly to workers, would this avoid, things such as large corporations who didn't necessarily need it and actually made a profit during the pandemic while accessing CEWS?
Yes, I mean, one of the there's different size businesses, as we know, that were impacted, right? So local businesses, were potentially severely impacted by the COVID pandemic. But in the case of the large corporations, we have a situation where nearly $15.5 billion has been potentially wrongly claimed by corporations. And there are major corporations that were receiving subsidies, essentially corporate welfare, in the form of CEWS. And for example, one corporation, TFI, a trucking and logistics corporation, it was established, was paying out dividends. So, not struggling at all during the pandemic and yet receiving CEWS. It was also simultaneously, it was laying off workers at the time, but not itself showing any loss. And so these are the kinds of situations that would emerge where we have a major loss in public money. This is public funds basically being reoriented for corporate gain. And the CRA is not showing any accountability in terms of, which businesses were eligible and not, and how that was established and what criteria was used. And so yeah, there's major accountability issues, and it's accountability to public dollars. And this also, in context, is all occurring at a time when we are simultaneously, as a society as a whole, facing a housing crisis, facing a health crisis, facing issues of access to healthy food. All of the basic essential services are under threat at the same time that corporations are being subsidized to this tune of at least $15.5 billion. And I've seen other figures that have been significantly higher. So there needs to be an accountability, and there needs to be the role of government to take action in reclaiming these funds, public funds.
Is there any way to kind of put into context, how much a loss of $15 billion truly affects our economy?
It's hard to provide a kind of impact, but it's obviously quite significant. I wish, I wish I had a comparable figure for something like, I mean, just to put it in hindsight, the federal government has, really relinquished its role in the provision of social housing. So even $1 billion of federal funds that could be redirected towards our housing crisis could have a significant impact. But yeah, it has all kinds of ripple effects, right? Because it has ripple effects on helping the unhoused, who then, with housing, it's been shown could help get work, helping to create new jobs, that are both community owned, community led, potentially collective forms of employment that are safer and that are more sustainable during times of crisis. So there are a lot of other interventions that could be supported or enabled by reinvestment of that money, and for something more sustainable down the road in terms of crisis times. The other thing we saw playing out, was literally people out on the streets during COVID, at risk. Also, the curfew, in times of the curfew, but also at risk for those that were working with essential work without protections and so forth. So, yeah, it's significant. Sorry, I don't have a better answer for you on that. I should have looked up. I could look up what comparable figures there could be for investing in other things.
If there's anything of note you think of after the fact, don't hesitate to let me know. But I know that's a difficult question to ask, or to answer.
Yeah, because it is significant. It's just how to quantify it is hard. It's a matter. Maybe I'll just say one other thing. This is also shows a matter of priorities, right? Where are the priorities? And at the moment, the priorities are privileging profit and profit-making entities over people, and supporting particularly those who are most in need. And this is clearly a political choice. The choice to, for instance, put a lot of effort, energy, and resources, this includes money, into seeking to claw back on CERB for those that were deemed not qualified or eligible, when these are individuals who, whose annual salaries come nowhere near the kind of profits that some of these large corporations are able to amass. This, is really a travesty. It's a travesty at all levels that need to, and the government needs to be held accountable for this. We've seen a lot of efforts to try to reclaim $2,000 of CERB money, right? And a lot of investment going into this relative to the $15.5 billion that could be used to help address our housing crisis, our healthcare crisis, protections for our most essential workers in times of need, these are the kinds of things where these are the kinds of efforts that where government needs to put our public money, our tax dollars, not towards corporate welfare and subsidizing those that are already registering higher dividends, profits, and so forth during pandemic moments. It's also important to note some of the corporations that had qualified for CEWS that are on list of corporations that have recently been publicized are also corporations that have some of the most egregious kinds of either environmental and or social injustices that are implicated in grave environmental and social injustices. We're talking about things like some of the energy companies, etc. And so these are the kinds of, so it's not just that these are profit-making entities at a time of crisis, but also entities that need to be held accountable on all levels.
Are there any companies that are based in Montreal that come to mind that maybe fit lack of environmental or social kind of standards, good standards?
A good question. I don't. I'd have to look at the list. I don't know offhand, to be honest.
That's
Yeah,
okay.
sorry. I'd have to look at the list again. But I did see, a number of because I don't remember the companies on hand, but I do remember that there were a number of companies that were, energy related and so forth.
So when I was doing research, I know that there used to be a database the government provided where you could see who accessed CEWS, but they took it down. Is there, like, when you refer to a list, is there something else available that shows which companies applied?
No, there was just a list I found in a news article.
Oh,
So otherwise,
yeah.
yeah, it was just in a news article what some of the, and these are companies that were, I think it was a Globe and Mail article that were registering, millions of dollars, some of them. I mean, it's just, yeah. I wish I could find it. It was a Financial Post article. So some of the companies, sorry, it's just pulled up now. Imperial Oil, Finning International, I don't know them. Transcontinental Inc., NFI Group, Russell Metals, Pipeline Corporation, Pembina Pipeline Corporation. I mean, TFI was among them. And I don't know if TFI is an international based. Actually, it's a Quebec based in Saint Laurent, Quebec, TFI International. So it's based here, the one that I was mentioning, that recorded profits at a time when, it was receiving CEWS and laid off workers.
Okay, thank you. And I just wanted to ask, you mentioned earlier how the government is investing money to kind of, for lack of a better word, like hunt down people who were ineligible for CERB payments. Is it kind of worth it based on how much money was given to people who were ineligible?
Absolutely not. I mean, what's worth the time and the energy and the resources is not to go after individuals who received CERB and their $2,000 stipend, but rather to go over corporations that are registering higher dividends for their shareholders and to the tune of 15.5 billion. This kind of corporate welfare needs to end. And yeah, that's who we should be pursuing, not individuals who are, many of whom are still struggling. I mean, the kinds of effects that the pandemic had. One other significant element to this is the kind of ripple effects it had for people on the ground, everyday workers. I mean, we had a context in which there were supply chain disruptions that raised the price of all kinds of consumer goods and food. We had, a lot of evictions, right? We had a number of people laid off or on furlough or what have you. And so there were a lot of ripple effects economically that were experienced. So 2000 in that bigger scheme of, this broader systemic economic crisis that was kind of, catalyzed by the pandemic, it's nothing by comparison to what the corporations have been handed out.
Do you think that there's anything we can do to kind of apply pressure on the government to, make them force the CRA to look into the potential $15 billion loss?
I mean, I think we would need to mobilize collectively. And I think things like this, building awareness in the media, because there were quite a number of people, for instance, who were directly impacted by the clawback on the CERB, right? And the efforts to get the CERB. And so there's a lot of built up frustration on that. There are a lot of people who, when the pandemic struck, did not have direct government support. In fact, what we saw in place of direct government support for those in need, for those losing jobs, who were precarious in terms of their housing situation, in terms of access to the essential services, those people were being supported mostly by mutual aid networks. Mutual aid networks emerged to fill a void by the state. And, what we need is to reach out to these different networks and media outlets to draw greater attention, I think, to the costs of this. And previously, sorry, you had asked me, for instance, how significant to the economy is $15.5 billion. The federal budget is around $400 billion. 15.5 is a significant amount of our federal budget that runs our country. That's a significant percentage. So, I haven't calculated the exact percentage it would calculate to, but I mean, it's, that would be the kind of, that would be what, at least I think 5%. Oops, sorry, I don't have the calculation. You're going to edit this, right?
Yes, of course.
But I mean, I wanted to find out what it is. So we're talking between 3 to 5% at least of the federal, but I mean, it's significant. It's definitely a significant amount of the total budget, which could be reinvested in our critical needs. I mean, also, if I find the light item on even things like, yeah, I wish I had looked this up before talking to you. But for instance, if one were to look at what is the government, investing in things like employment services or okay, so for instance, the government has spent, by comparison, $3 billion over the last 3 years to support 500,000 new job and training opportunities. 1/3 of the $15.5 billion.
That's scary. That's not good to
I
kind
mean,
of.
it just shows you how much support, more direct support for, enabling livelihood for residents, right? How much more support there could be if one could reclaim our public money.
Thank you.
And this is also just, not to lose sight that this is public money, and this is money that we have all paid into and contributed to collectively. And it's being used to underwrite corporate profit.
Thank you. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you think is important to know or that you'd like to share?
No, I think that's probably it. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time, Norma. It's been such a pleasure speaking
Sure.
with you and learning more about this situation.
So, just for interview's sake, would you mind just stating your name and, a title I could refer to you as, like, former Montrealer or
Sure.
something like that?
So Matt Polinchuk, former Montrealer, moved to Toronto August 2020. So kind of the middle of pandemic shutdowns, and that was also the summer in which I received my CERB benefits, and that was the last month of my CERB benefits. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So, did you receive like the total offered by CERB?
Yes. So I didn't apply for the student one because by the time I was applying, I would have just finished a degree at McGill, and so I ended up applying for like the regular CERB because I would have otherwise worked this regular summer job I had in Montreal, but I wasn't because of several things, a lot of uncertainty around what COVID was, how it spread. That they didn't even know that it was how it was spread at all at the point. Partner has quite bad asthma, and so didn't want to risk anything. We were hearing about asthma as being a really complicating factor for COVID, obviously, and so I decided to go for opting for CERB rather than getting my regular job in the Montreal summer, and it was the full amount. So it was, oh God, was it $1,000 a month? No, $2,000 a month. $1,000 every 2 weeks. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, $2,000 a month.
Yeah, 2000.
Yeah, and yeah, I was as like going on. I was like, okay, I'm gonna be extremely careful. People were already talking about like the government being particularly, vigilant about people, not filling it out correctly. And so when I was on like CERB website through unemployment, like, unemployment benefits or whatever it was, I was super careful when submitting all the when clicking each week it was that these were the reasons why I wasn't working and I wasn't actually employed and I wasn't receiving money from other sources. I was trying to be so careful because they said they're being very strict about it. I'm like, okay, I want to make sure. And if for whatever reason I didn't qualify, I was ready to not qualify, but I was considered qualified to get it, and so I decided to pursue it.
Do you think that because you were kind of in this middle situation of graduating and about to start a job, do you suspect that this might be why you're kind of in that gray zone of CERB? And if so, do you think that the government should maybe have more compassion for people who were in your situation?
Yeah, I mean, it was a really tough time for several people, for many people, if not most people, um, and yeah, I was particularly. I consider myself particularly in need for it. Could I have worked? Was anything particularly preventing me, physically restraining me from working? No, but there was so much uncertainty, and that was the purpose of that funding to be there. And I otherwise, rent would have been a difficulty. Basic groceries, would have been would have had several difficulties. Me in the middle of a move, there would have been, there's a lot of expenses there. Um, yeah, like not being a full student at the time, and then taking up employment by September 1st and going off of CERB as of, and I was very careful. I called the government several times, like, I'm starting September 1st. I don't want any more money. I don't want to get, considered, if, defrauding the government of money. Like, I was like, I'm done this day, please. And I think my last check came in like a day into technically when my semester started, because when my semester started for a graduate program in Toronto, also started a TA contract and other things. I received, I think, the last bit of funding from CERB like a day into that, and I called them. I'm like, "Is this okay?" They're like, "No, you filed it. That was for your last week of August. It's fine." So it could have been that. It could have been very well that like I had just been off the end of being a student, joining employment, and I don't know. And even when they sent out these the letters saying that you owe, in particular myself, $1,000. I don't know what the justification was. I don't know what I don't know where they made the miscalculation. It just said that there was a miscalculation. I went on to, just speaking to you recently, I was like, I'm gonna go onto CRA's website. Maybe there's something on like my account, my CRA account. There's no documentation there. There is a thing that says you owe $1,000 because of the CERB repayment program, but it doesn't tell me where the miscalculation was. And when I was like receiving the funding, I'm telling you, I was like so careful. I did not want anything to go wrong with it. And I don't know where this miscalculation even was. I kind of believe it, given that this massive audit has shown it. But it's not great that right now there's not transparency, that a person right at this moment, like myself, can't find the reasoning behind where this miscalculation was.
And will you fight it? And if not, why? Or contest it, I guess.
I plan to, because I think I received the first letter about it back when everybody's taught, like September, October, something like that. It's been a bit of a days, just because there's I'm trying to do a lot of things right now, trying to pay my bills in a more expensive city. I see this bill and I'm like, this doesn't make sense. I've heard from several people that they were exercising leniency for students, but according to the CRA, I've been a PhD student for the past 3 years. I should be registered as a full-time student. And so I figured, they didn't count me because whatever. I have TA and RA responsibilities. Maybe they don't consider me enough of I'm not just taking classes. I'm still making money in some kind of way. But I really want to, when I find, time and energy to have to deal with a government agency, I very much want to call and discuss this matter, because it seems pretty unreasonable to me. It's a very difficult time. They're still asking for this money back when we're still seeing rates of the spread of COVID at still pretty alarming level. Increases in interest rates and inflation. Groceries getting more expensive, and now they want me to do these extra expenses to them when, let's just say, timing isn't great. And it just so happens I'm a student. I'm also working a part-time job to help me pay bills in Toronto. When when my buck is going a lot, isn't going the full way as it used to be. It's not great timing to also levy an extra cost into my life at this point. And I understand, it could very well be the case that they overpaid and whatever, but there's a lot of people who don't pay a lot in what they owe the CRA, or that the CRA could collect more from people that avoid and evade large corporations that use tricky modes of accounting in order to not pay their full what they're due, and so they're going after students, part-time workers in a difficult time. So in terms of priorities, I don't think they have their priorities straight in that matter either.
Very quickly, I just lastly wanted to ask, do you think that it's unfair that the CRA will not look into potential $15 billion of subsidies that should not have been provided to corporations while they're, going after people?
Yeah, I think so. Like, for many people, this whatever a person ends up owing that they want in installments of $200 from me, for example, that takes away from other things that might be, I consider, like, more important for my life, including really expensive groceries, really expensive rents, that ultimately, like, corporations as institutions themselves don't have to worry about. Yes, who they employ and the fact that they pay people, and there might be a trickle down kind of thing in terms of a corporation having to pay an expense and that finding its way down to workers. It's many degrees of separation compared to actively targeting individuals who receive these benefits because they needed them. And the fact that there was a slight accounting error, I doubt it was anybody taking that error from the CRA and running out and taking this extra grand that they don't deserve in order to, buy particularly luxurious things. Like these, this extra amount of money went somewhere. It likely went back into the economy. They had to pay tax on it, on the products that they bought with it. Meanwhile, corporations that already receive several benefits from the government are already getting away with perhaps other kind of accounting issues and subsidies that they're not due. It just obviously seems unfair. It's very much this direct versus indirect thing, human versus institution. Like, we should be we should be after institutions and making sure that they've received what they're due and pay back things that they weren't due, as opposed to individuals that clearly needed it. And the intention of these benefits were to help people that needed it in a difficult time. And now they're asked to pay it back, when for all, in all likelihood was something that was tremendously beneficial to them. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time.